You are listening to Spotlight Sessions with Justin Bamforth. The program provides an inside look at the creative field through exclusive conversations with industry professionals. Every episode is recorded live each month in the Adobe Creative Career Discord. Check out the show links to learn more and join for free, or visit adobediscord.com and click on Adobe Creative Career. This episode was previously recorded before a live listening audience. Shruthi Andru is a New York City and Abu Dhabi designer, storyteller, architect, and a relentless optimist who views challenges as hidden opportunities. Now, she received her bachelor's in architecture, then transitioned into user experience design, or UX, after earning a master's in human-computer interaction. Over the past 2.5 years, Shruthi has crafted enterprise products for marketing, experiences at Adobe, or as she puts it on her LinkedIn, solving for the messy middle, designing for human-agent interactions. But she has also worked in healthcare UX, designing cancer detection software, and developing community housing as an architect. She's got a lot to share tonight. But first, just a quick disclaimer before we begin. The views and opinions shared today by Shruthi are solely her own and do not represent those of Adobe or any other organization she is affiliated with. And also, since we will be exploring some rather mature topics later in the show, please exercise discretion if you are younger and currently tuning in live to the broadcast. So without further ado, Shruthi, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Justin. That was a very nice introduction. And yes, love the disclaimer.
All right. First thing I want to do, though, because this is really interesting. I want all of you in the audience to go visit Shruthi's website at shruthiandru.com, which I've gone ahead and posted in the show chat. Or for those of you listening to this on demand, it'll be in the show notes. Go ahead and click on that site now. And I want you to click on the About page at the top right there. I've looked through a lot of bio pages for personal websites, and yours, Shruthi, is written so beautifully. All of the relevant content you'd expect to see on a bio page is right there, mixed in with a dash of humor. For example, you write, "When I'm not designing, you can find me drinking coffee and complaining about the weather. That's what being raised in Abu Dhabi will do to you." And then at the bottom of the page in the footer, it reads, "Hit me up if you want to talk about design, books to read, brewing coffee, ASMR cooking videos, Taylor Swift's business strategies, or something else." And then at the very, very bottom, in a super small type size, it reads, "Design with love, coffee, and lots of cat videos." This is how you do it. This is how you write a bio page. Shruthi, how did you come up with this, and why did you come up with this?
Well, as I was trying to transition from architecture into UX, a lot of people, the advice that I got was showcase your personality. And I didn't want to do it through visual design. And I needed a way for my humor to reflect. And the best way to do that was through writing. That was the only way I knew. And I guess a lot of exploration, and mind you, this was way before ChatGPT existed. And I think, don't tell ChatGPT this, but I think I'm funnier than ChatGPT at this point.
All right, we'll keep that joke between us humans here. Let's get into this origin story, because you mentioned, jumping from architecture into UX design. That's quite the leap. But what led you to leave architecture and pursue a career in UX?
Yeah, that's a pretty heavy topic at this point. Well, I actually got into engineering in the beginning, and then transitioned into architecture, and then made the switch into UX. Well, the first two were sort of out of parental pressure, and in general, the lack of knowing what I wanted to do at 18, like any other 18-year-old does. But I think the third switch was a little more intentional. I think the main turning point in my career was at the height of COVID during my internship in 110 degrees Fahrenheit heat. I realized that while I was on a site visit, I am way more interested in people and human behavior than in construction details. And in order to be the best at what I do, I really need to have this very strong grasp of mathematics and civil engineering to build out all of these visions and dreams that I had. And I decided this was not it for me, and I pivoted. And luckily, or well, fortunately or unfortunately, COVID hit, I used that time to work 14 hours a day, going through UX courses, trying to build out a portfolio, apply for my master's, and carry out the internship that I had been employed for. And yeah, funnily enough, after the summer, it was my final year, and I had to choose a topic for my undergraduate thesis. And my professor at that time was super motivating, and he let me pursue this behavioral psychology thing that I wanted to do using architecture. And even if the project wasn't completely rooted in traditional architecture, I decided to design for prison typologies. And that's how accidentally got into UX.
Going back to like studying UX, are there any like specific UX courses nowadays that you recommend? Because obviously you went to a formal university, but there's a lot of these online programs that give out certificates. Are any of them like reputable or legitimate, or how can you tell which ones to take and which ones to maybe avoid?
So I would definitely avoid the boot camps. Um, from what I've seen, a lot of boot camps look at UX from a very process standpoint. It's more about what the outputs you're generating and how you can send them out to the world, or like create these perfect portfolios that will be reviewed by hiring managers and write out the portfolio case study in almost a templatized format. And I think books are a great source of like resource. There's a lot of great books out there. I would definitely start off with those. In terms of a specific course, I did take a couple of EDX courses from either Georgia Tech or MIT that had HCI in it. It gave me a brief introduction into it, but most of the learnings that I did get was from unpaid internships and just practice overall, and honing that art and skill of understanding what design was, understanding what interface design was, and how do I design for um, people from different domains.
Okay, that's really interesting right there because going back to the whole boot camp thing, I know that those are really popular right now. And I know a lot of people are kind of focused on those. And I've always questioned them. I've always wondered about that because there's so many.
100%.
Are there any other specific like books, maybe some that you're reading now that you can recommend? Because I know the audience always likes to hear about book suggestions.
So the first book that I thought was really impactful was this book called Ruined by Design. It's by someone called Mike Montanaro. He defines design or a designer as anyone who can create something or anything that has been built by humans. Um, and the object and the artifact that they generate are designs. So I look at design from a very philosophical perspective, and his book viewed it from a very ethical lens. And I really enjoyed that about the book, and it made me reflect on what I create and what I put out into the world. So I would definitely recommend that. Something else that deeply impacted me when I was starting out was this book called Mismatched. It was more of an accessibility book, but the way the author spoke about, how do you say it? The people who are impacted the most are the ones who can design the best for that situation, is a line that stuck with me, for, I think, for most of my career for the last 4 or 5 years in UX design. Yeah, those are definitely two books that I'd recommend. I recently read a book in our team book club called The Umami Strategy, and that was a great book into how you can design products and how you can use design strategy to design products.
And Glow asked this question too. How long do you spend in this phase of education until you're really good enough to be hired? Is there a way to tell? Is there a way to know?
No, no, no. Uh, uh, we all have imposter syndrome at some point, and education is this constant process that never ends. It always feels like you're never good enough or your portfolio is never done enough. My best advice would be go for it. Try, take your shot. Um, try as many things as you can, even if it's free or like unpaid. Volunteer somewhere, that helps a lot. Go for different domains. Don't stick to one domain, like either enterprise or consumer. Volunteer. I recently volunteered at my weed store, was helping painting walls, and I learned so much from that. So yeah, just go out and generate art at this point, and that helps you learn a lot. I know it doesn't seem like it in the moment, But at some point, while you're doing something totally random in a corporate environment, it will all click.
You describe design as sort of an adventure, one that's built on relationships, observations, even risk taking. Can you kind of like go into that philosophy a little bit more? And how does that philosophy kind of play out in your approach?
That's a very interesting question. So to me, when I say design is an adventure, it's like a journey that you're embarking on, and you don't know what you're going to get. You can plan for it all you want, but there are so many variables that come into the journey, and that you just have to adapt. And adventure is the best way that I can say, like, talk about design. The reason I call it an adventure is because it's about celebrating all of these complexities and trying to simplify them as much as possible. And our life is an adventure, or I see life as an adventure. And to me, design is just a part of it. And I think the highlight there is it's not what we design, but how we design that matters. When it comes to risk taking, I think perseverance is almost a life choice of mine at this point. I really wouldn't be here without it. Um, my parents came from a very traditional mindset, and a lot of my early life involved convincing them. Like I remember we'd have these extremely long debates about something as really simple as choosing paint colors for the walls, and why I should be allowed to paint plum or something as pink, hot pink, for my walls, and why not go with simple white or beige. And I think that taught me how to root my arguments and facts and keep pushing for what I want and what I believe in. So when it comes to my career, I think I've just brought all of those learnings from those events. And yeah, I don't think even would have this job if it wasn't for resilience, and like to get through those hardships and perseverance to keep moving forward when everything is ending.
I'm so glad that you brought that up too, because to those of you who are listening right now, we've all been in those meetings where some executive or stakeholder just doesn't get it. They may not understand our approach, ideas and design decisions. And then our proposals, right? They're usually met with a resounding and heartbreaking no. But because you mentioned that, that persistence, it pays off for you. And, you've mentioned that to me before in our prior conversations that the first no is never a no. And I love your never give up mindset, but how do you navigate some of those challenges when you're outright told no by your employers? How do you work through that?
A sheer sense of belief in yourself. I mean, obviously that has to be cultivated. Well, I'm going to answer that question with a story. So I started my job off at Adobe as a contractor, and I think I worked for almost 8 or 9 months. And when it was time to get hired, they didn't have the budget for that quarter, and my visa was running out. So I had about 2 months of time before I had to get out of the US because I didn't have a job lined up. And I knew I had to be super persistent about it. Everyone wanted to help, but there was no money. And my sense of belief on the first no is never a no is a literal line at this point. So I had just reached out to my VP of design, and I didn't know whether it was going to work or not. I was like, worst case, what will happen? I will get fired. I anyway have a month left in this job. I explained my case, and I'm so grateful that he listened to me. And yeah, he spoke to my managers and directors, and then that I got a job. So that experience sort of taught me that there's always a way. And if you look at it from a different angle, you come to the same conclusion that a no is never a no. And I think that's just been my philosophy in life.
That is inspiring right there. So did you, when you had that difficult conversation, were you just upfront and just honest with them and just said, "Hey, look, this is what's going to happen."
Yes, 100%.
Really? Wow. Because sometimes like we're taught in the business world to kind of keep those emotional, those personal things out of the conversation and just focus on like it being like a business decision, right? But you did the opposite. Do you think that sometimes when we're having like other difficult conversations, like just pitching a project in general, when do you know when to bring in your emotions into it or your like your personal side into the discussion? Like when do you know when to step over that boundary?
It's actually a good question. I don't think it's your personal emotions that you bring in. I think it's the emotion that connects with the person that you're presenting to. Where where is that gap, and how do you connect with that person, and what do you say to them that will get them to believe in your idea? And if they don't, why do they not believe in your idea? What are metrics that they look for when they assess an idea? And obviously who you're talking to matters. For example, if I was talking to one of my colleagues versus a manager versus someone more senior who may not have as much time as one of my colleagues. So I'd structure the conversation very differently. And I think I'd hit them with what they want to listen to first, and then get into why I should be the one doing it and why I deserve it and why I'm the best person to do this job. I think that could get you a long way.
I have to say, I was, well, a little surprised at some of the very diverse domains you've been a part of and applied your design thinking to. Things like sex toy design and to prison architecture. Let's get into some of that, or as you call it, designing for human behavior change. How on earth did that come about?
I love this topic. I mean, not all of, I mean, I don't know how open the listeners are, and not everyone enjoys when I talk about this, but I love to get into this. I have always been interested in understanding people. And when I was younger, it was very difficult for me to understand people's emotions. So I actually learned to read facial expressions and body language. And over time, I think some of those translated into design as well. It really started in my undergrad thesis. I had to design something, and I knew I wanted to go get this master's. I wanted to hit two birds with one stone, and I decided to tackle a very taboo topic, which was designing for prisons. And my entire experience for designing for prisons was really rooted in understanding how a space can affect behavior and vice versa. And even though it was this super complex problem involving government policy, I want I sort of learned how to focus on what I can do as a designer versus everything else in the noise. And the way I viewed it was my job as an architect was just beyond designing a pretty facade, but I wanted to build something that had not only had character, but was also imposing, but not too imposing at the same time, and fostered that sense of punishment. And it was a really difficult task when you look at it from someone who knew nothing about this domain. But through conversations that I've had and literature research, obviously, I was glad that I got to build something. And my personal goals for the prison project was to design that space that provided some sort of moral and cultural education and approached punishment from this sense of reformation rather than reincarceration. And I think that journey really kicked off my other interests. And I realized that I enjoy tackling taboo topics and thinking about how I can use design to influence behavior change in some sort of meaningful way. And that's where I call it designing for human behavior change. Now, getting into the sex toy part. Obviously, now I had this prison design. I had to follow it up with something equally as taboo. I'm not going to lower that bar, right? I mean, I'm kidding. But yeah, I was fortunate enough to have this great mentor in my master's program, and she was involved in ethical design. So I think that mentorship combined with this intense curiosity that I had about taboo topics led me to dive deep into this completely unconventional area called sex toy design. And I didn't get into this project thinking that I was going to create a toolkit for like to help people design sex toys. Ironically, at first, I actually started off with the idea, believe it or not, redesigning pornographic websites because I thought I needed to stay in the digital realm as a UX designer. But then after problem framing and reframing, I realized that there was this massive design gap in the sex tech space. And most of these sex toys are pretty much the same. Somewhere in my research, I realized that the real problem wasn't in manufacturing or the resources. It was actually that the design phase lacked resources and there wasn't enough research or tools available for people or designers to create more diverse and inclusive sex toys. So I decided to create a toolkit. And obviously, that wasn't an easy process. I had no clue where to start. And unlike now, where I could just perplexity something, I'm not sure if that is a phrase. I mean, maybe it should be. But ChatGPT certainly didn't exist till the end of my third semester. It came out somewhere in like November of 2022. And there was all of this academic literature available, but it wasn't particularly for sex toys. It was more in the sex tech space, which involved things like menstrual care or intimacy apps, but not so much focused on the sex toys itself. So I conducted a bunch of interviews with both designers and reached out to a lot of female owned sex toy brands and interview shot my shot, sent them a bunch of emails, and a couple of them who reached out, I interviewed them, tried to understand what their process was and all of the roadblocks and challenges that they had while designing a sex toy. And that sort of just helped me shape my research even more. And I conducted these things called co-design workshops, where I got together a bunch of people from different disciplines in design, or who had a background in design, and got them to create a sex toy or what they would need in order to create a sex toy. And I think the end result was a series of these worksheets and card decks that I could give to people and they could use see it as a game that would help them guide through the process of designing sex toys. And obviously, my background in architecture definitely helped. I was able to understand ergonomics and research in human anatomy. That was helpful too. Yeah, ultimately, I think it was about giving people the tools to innovate in a space that is very often overlooked or is considered quote unquote taboo.
All of these things need designers. They need creative people to solve these creative problems and challenges and obstacles. So it definitely takes a tremendous amount of courage. And I applaud you again for that. I also love the name that you used for this toolkit. You called it the Lust Lab. It's quite interesting. Let's talk about when you're designing with behavior change in mind. What are some of these principles and lessons that you find yourself coming back to again and again, or maybe some of these patterns and these themes that you see pop up?
Definitely one of the key skills. I know empathy is thrown around a lot in UX design, and empathy is a very tricky thing to understand. What does empathy mean? What does it mean to empathize with someone? It's such a abstract feeling, to understand how someone else is feeling or to put yourself in in that person's shoes. I think that's something that is definitely developed over time. But one hard skill that you can definitely learn is the art of interviewing. And doing this around taboo topics especially helped. Um, Initially, when I had started this process, I had to understand people's perspective not only on sex and sex toys, but also their process in general, and talk about this sensitive subject in a way that they feel comfortable enough to open up to me and tell me things that beyond just what I'm asking. And asking people about something as personal about their views on sex meant that I had to take this very careful, respectful approach and a lot of restraint in how I asked those questions. And obviously, I can't be unabashedly myself, keeping their emotions in check as well. So, yeah, I think that is one of the key skills that you can learn when you're just getting started out in design. Observation is definitely one of those other key skills. Just understanding how the person is reacting to your questions and what they're not saying will take you a long way in understanding what they need. I'm not sure who said this, but it was there's a quote that says, "Don't ask people for what they want." Um, I think it was Ford when he was designing his cars. I'm not sure, but if you ask someone what they want, they will tell you they want a horse chariot and not a car. So they don't know that they need a car. It's up to you as a designer to create that for them.
Yeah, I know that there's a formal position known as a UX researcher, but a lot of times, especially with smaller companies, they don't have the budget to hire out a whole UX team with specialized people doing specialized things. As a UX designer, you have to do the research yourself. But like, how do you train yourself? How do you like learn those skills to give the interviews, to conduct the user surveys, to find that data?
Yeah. So definitely go prepared is one of my biggest tips. Obviously, research. You've done your research before interviewing me. Similarly, research your subject before uh, understanding what they need and research their domain and expertise. Uh, Today, we have a bunch of AI tools. We have ChatGPT, we have Perplexity to conduct this research. You're not starting from ground zero. You can always have these conversations with AI and go further from there. Something that you can look into as a designer that's just starting to get into this is understanding how to write an interview protocol. Um, so the way I write my protocols is usually divide them into topics. I don't choose more than three main topics to ask them and then create questions in those topics. And I usually have leading questions and maybe a backup question in case the subject doesn't understand what I'm asking, and maybe follow-up questions if they don't answer all of my questions or ideas that I had. And yeah, and then move from topic one to topic two to topic three. So the flow actually starts when you're preparing for the interview rather than after, I would guess, or during the process of the interview.
Going back to your website, this question came in from Elizabeth earlier. She asked, "What inspired you to add percentages to the titles of some of your projects?"
So great question, Elizabeth. So this is something that I actually read on LinkedIn while I was applying for my jobs. What I found out was that hiring managers barely look at your portfolio for 3 seconds, 10 if you're lucky. So the main headings or your titles should be the point that you want to get across. When I first started writing out my case studies, I had structured it in the same templatized format that was available everywhere on the internet with like process, a goal, results. But when you look at it from a typographical standpoint, the first thing that you're noticing from the page is actually those headings, right? Now imagine if the headings were a one-line summary of what you wanted to say in that paragraph, and that is much more scannable and easier to understand. In 5 seconds flat, you know what the project is about, where you were going with this, what the results were, and maybe the percentages add that extra oomph that you see in a resume. So they know that you had tangible impact with the work that you were doing and it wasn't just done in thin air. So long story short, it helps hiring managers get you hired, and it also helps for a more scannable portfolio.
That is phenomenal advice. Audience, you got to take a look at Shruti's website at ShrutiAndru.com. It's posted in the chat. You can take a look at it. And for those of you listening on demand, it will be in the show notes here. Now, if you are new to the Adobe Creative Career Discord, I'd like to take a moment to share one of the coolest things we're working on right now. And that would be the Adobe Creative Apprenticeship Program. This program connects aspiring creative people like you with top creative companies providing the actual training and experience that you need, which also looks amazing on a resume. Think of it like the ultimate internship meets mentorship opportunity. But wait, that's not all. You see, there is another aspect to the program. and it's called Commissioned Projects. This is where you can get even more experience working on an actual paid project with Adobe. Yes, that's right, Adobe as your first client. Seriously. The details on the Creative Apprenticeship Program, the Commissioned Projects, and more incredible career resources can all be found at behance.net/resources. That's behance.net/resources. Going off of the mentorship angle here, Shruti, I want to ask you about the value of mentorship, especially in your career, because if I understand correctly, it played an important part in your growth, right?
Yes. I was fortunate enough to have, I mean, I still have them. They're four very great mentors. And I think some of them don't even know that they are my mentors at this point. But yeah, like like every teenager out there, I was largely misunderstood in high school, and I was never the one for academics. And that's not the case right now. And that has a lot to do with the mentors that I had during my master's or towards the end of my undergrad, even. I got my first taste of what good mentorship is and how academia and just education can really shape your thinking through one of my mentors. And yeah, she was one of the first few people who made me believe that I could be my most authentic self. And that greatly impacted me to be unabashedly myself and that it was okay to be this way, especially coming from a or like being raised by those very traditional parents shapes your thinking and almost restricts you from being who you are. And it's very difficult not to be the black sheep. And then from there, my the first person who hired me into this company, I had no credentials to my name beyond just an educational degree and grit. And I still am enamored by the fact that she hired me at this point. And then the other two mentors that I had, I still currently have them, like I said. They really helped me find my voice and speak it in a way that the world understands. And this was my largest gap where I knew what I wanted to say, but I didn't say it in a way that other people understood it or in a way that was pleasant to hear. And these mentors really helped me shape my thoughts and opinions in a way that was more palatable to people.
In your opinion, what makes a good mentor? And what should somebody look for? What are some of the qualities and traits when seeking out a good mentor?
That is a great question. Definitely being open minded not just to the difference in culture or viewpoints, but also open minded in the approach that the other person has or you have to design life or whatever domain you're getting into. And also, I think the biggest and the most impactful thing is calling your out. If your mentor does not criticize you, then they are not real. Positivity will not get you places. Constructive criticism will get you very far in places. So definitely find a mentor who says no to you a lot, because that way you'll learn something and you'll definitely learn convincing them, if not anything else.
Ooh, that's very provocative, and it's very true too. And it also speaks the East Coast mindset, because in New York City there is a no BS mindset, and you can tell when somebody is kind of like wasting your time or giving you the runaround. It's like New Yorkers will call that out; they will not hold back.
100%. I mean, it's not just New Yorkers, but I mean, I don't think anyone at my company wastes time, or we're all very respectful of each other's time. And if it's a Slack message that we need to send, we will send you a Slack message rather than an email. And I personally am one not for Slack messages. I would rather take a call and chat about it for 15 minutes and have that conversation than go on a back and forth thread. So that's very I don't know, ironic at this point. But you're definitely right about New Yorkers and calling out people's BS. We definitely do not have the time. From every train that you miss, you have wasted 20 minutes and sitting in a hot subway car or the subway station.
Yes. And that is a fate worse than death, I tell you. When you go to school to learn, how to be a designer, how to be a creative individual, they don't necessarily teach you how to develop a thick skin. And that trait, that skill is very important because in your creative career, you're going to find that you're going to get rejected a lot more than you're going to get accepted. You're going to run into those walls of no over and over again. But like you mentioned with a good mentor, someone who consistently tells you no, but again, in a respectful way, a helpful manner, they should become your best friend because they're helping you grow. So instead of like finding, a reason why somebody is wrong, try to understand why they might have a valid point or they might have a different angle to consider. And that also speaks to UX design, right, Shruti? Like we are always asking ourselves the never-ending question of why. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. Also, like going back to the point on mentorship, I think I've had my fair share of bad mentors, but my real taste for rejection, I got it in my first year of architecture. I had this professor rip up my A1 sized design sheet that I had worked very hard on, and that was very heartbreaking. And it quickly taught me never to be too attached to something. But it also taught me how important it was to think about what we were putting out into the world. And especially this came into focus when I was transitioning into UX design. Like I said, the book Ruined by Design, it made me reflect a lot on the value of what I'm generating and why I'm generating something. So it's not just why something exists, but why are you making this? So when you're creating physical design artifacts, whether it's a product or even buildings, you're almost cognizant of what you're generating. Whereas with digital design, it's very ephemeral, is a word that I'd use. And it's very easy to keep generating countless artifacts. And this is where the ethics of everything comes in. So, my biggest advice, apart from observation and all of these skills that you can have, is ask yourself if you're creating something just for the sake of creating it, or are you actually solving a problem? I mean, sometimes as a designer or an artist, you need to create something for the sake of it. But I strongly believe that whatever you put out into the world should be meaningful and not just piling on to digital trash, as I would call it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it because every single decision you make should serve a purpose. So always ask yourself that. Going back to mentorship, do you find that good mentors aren't always the ones who are in the highest positions, like CEOs and top level execs?
Oh, yes. In fact, when you're a CEO or a top, I mean, this is just my personal opinion. The higher you get, the more detached you are from the craft. You are more involved in the politics of the company and getting, or the business of the company. And there's a lot you can learn from them. But when you're starting out early on in your career, I would definitely go for someone who's been through it recently or like someone who's passed through that same phase. They those lessons are fresher and they have perspective from the now and not just CEOs who became CEOs and who were designers 10 years ago and who have no clue what's happening today. For example, this is a very hypothetical example. Let's say my I'm in a product company. I have a CEO who was a designer 20 years ago. They probably don't even know how to use Figma. So how will you learn all of the hard skill sets that you need to learn starting out? You can definitely learn a bunch of soft skills, but again, there's perspective that you can get from someone at a higher position. But I definitely also would lean into people who are more junior, who've just started their journey out in the industry as well.
Besides the Adobe Creative Apprenticeship Program, which I mentioned earlier, how does someone go about finding a mentor or someone who can be a mentor to them?
I think recently over the past 3 years, there's this website called ADP List. They have a lot of connections that you can make with people from the industry. They have a bunch of great people who volunteer their time to be mentors. So I definitely check that out. I think that's a great resource. Another thing is connecting on LinkedIn. And I know people don't respond, but when you're honest about why you're reaching out to them and it's not because of a job, if it's something that you genuinely see that's interesting in their profile, definitely reach out to them, send a thoughtful message, and 5 out of 10 times, someone will respond. At least it's 50%. So that's better than zero.
What should somebody say like in their LinkedIn message? Let's say they see somebody that they want to connect with. How do they craft that ideal message that will resonate with that individual and get them interested in starting that conversation?
That is a very difficult question to answer for me. It's a really difficult question. I get mad anxiety before I have to send DMs to anyone. I don't have physical anxiety. Like, I love talking to people, but I have so much digital anxiety. So if you're struggling to write something, I 100% empathize with you. I would definitely just use ChatGPT to frame, like, I would write out my initial draft with things that I found interesting about them, why I'm reaching out to them, and ask ChatGPT to construct it for you. I cannot construct messages. And in fact, I actually use AI a lot to send out these messages because I used to spend a lot of time crafting them because of this digital anxiety. And I've noticed that uh, ChatGPT helps you a lot with simple tasks like this. But long story short is find out, be honest, find out why you're reaching out to them. Look at something interesting. Is there something that you can connect with them about? For example, if you're an architect transitioning into UX design and you came across my portfolio, that you already have something that you can connect with me about. You go deeper, you find out that I like cats. Include something as silly as something you've read in their footer. Things that aren't very obvious, but you can see when you've deeply gone through their work. Include those things in the messaging, and I promise they'll reach out to you.
That kind of brings the human factor into it, you know, that empathy, as you mentioned. But let's get into AI because, as we've discussed on this program in the past, it can be a helpful tool in the creative's toolbox instead of an enemy or an adversary. You know, would you consider AI a tool or would you consider it a collaborator?
Yeah, I love this question. I'm gonna explain this with a little story. When I was in my first year of architecture, we spent hours learning how to draw plans or all of these diagrams using very large protractors and A1 size sheets and countless hours. I think after the second year or so, we got to use AutoCAD. And I remember thinking, I can't imagine how people did it 20 years ago when the software did not exist. And to me personally, I think AI is the same. But unlike other tools, you're not just learning how to use the actions present in the tool from the software interface perspective, but in order, you're sort of understanding how to communicate your intent to the AI. And the way I see it, intent is about communicating three things. One is domain knowledge, second is context, and the third is the tacit knowledge. Tacit knowledge is basically knowledge that is unique to you and only you, that is shaped from your experiences. So, how would this apply? Let's say that I want to create a plan to facilitate a workshop, and just asking or telling that to the AI is not enough. You need to understand, or the AI needs to understand what the workshop is about. This is where domain comes in. Then it needs to understand the context around the workshop. For example, things like, why are we running this? Why do we need this workshop? How long is this workshop? Who is this workshop for? Things like that. And then there is tacit knowledge, or the things that only you know. So this could be something as small as, hey, people spend the first 5 minutes of my meeting having chit chat. So we may not need an icebreaker. So those are some very simple things, and using that framework helps you communicate with the AI. So TLDR on this is, yes, I see AI as a tool, and it's similar to learning Photoshop or any other complex software. If you know those little hacks on how to use the tool, it not only speeds up your workflow, but I genuinely believe that you can manipulate pixels to create insane digital art.
Now, you mentioned also using AI to craft, messages when you're writing to people. But how else have you used AI to kind of boost your productivity and creativity?
So one simple example is um, I hyperfixate a lot. So when I'm in the middle of meetings and someone's genuinely talking about something, I have a bunch of questions that's running, and my brain is trying to come up with the perfect question to ask because I don't want to ask my half formulated questions, right? So I'm busy thinking about that question in my head, and they've said three other interesting things. So nowadays, I just keep a running list of things that I want to ask the person at the end, and AI knows all of this. I feed it into the AI, and it generates those questions for me, so I don't have to think as much. And I continue. I'm more present in the conversations. That's definitely one way that it has helped me. Uh, Second one is I am almost at 4 or 5 places at the same time, and I all context switching is very difficult. So for things that are non-Adobe related, I usually run Granola, which is voice transcription and yeah, voice transcription software. So I basically run it in the background, and then after the meeting is done, when I come back to it 1 or 2 days later, I can ask it a question and I immediately know why the meeting was there, what was discussed, and it's much, much, much better than Copilot or ChatGPT or any other AI transcription tool that I've seen. Something else that I use AI for is so earlier on when MCPs were just coming out, when Claude didn't have as robust integrations as it has today, I had uploaded or like created a bunch of MCPs or used a bunch of MCPs to connect all of my data sources. So connected Notion, my Apple Notes, my OneNote, because I take notes in the first place that is available, and I don't just take notes in a single place. And when I have to come back to something, it takes me a lot of time to figure out where all my notes are. So it helped me connect all of these disparate sources and just ask the AI, okay, what did I write about this? When is this due? Or simple questions like that. The last thing is a little strange, I would call it. I use it as a manifestation and an optimism journal. I have to keep up my optimism somehow. Uh, and this is something that I saw someone do. And earlier on this year, I realized how important your inner dialogue is. And I usually have this or these large, ambitious goals, which I may or may not hit. And it's so hard to maintain optimism when you're not getting there, or especially when your goal is 1 year out, no one's fully seen what you're seeing or understanding how you can accomplish this. So I have this projects folder on ChatGPT, and I'm usually like, I did X. How does this add to Y? That just like boosts my optimism and keeps me focused on, hey, I'm not losing track of this goal. Everything I do is adding up to this.
That is really interesting, and you bring up another aspect that's it's part of what I call the creative's curse. There's all of these aspects to being a creative person that are a blessing, but also a curse. And one of those aspects that you mentioned is, having that extended view further down the road. Not everyone can see that because we're looking to anticipate problems before they become problems, right? And sometimes we can see things that others can't. So I love the fact that you're an advocate for manifestation and maintaining that optimism. Because sometimes when we're dealing with the creative's curse, so to speak, is we get very negative. We tend to doubt ourselves. We tend to lose some of our confidence. How do you navigate those seas when you're having some of those like darker moments in life? How do you maintain that optimism besides, journaling it?
Journaling definitely helps. I'm going to respond to this with two things that I do. Well, earlier on this year, this is a bit personal, where I went through a breakup and I thought I was going to get married. And in my head, I had this plan all figured out and it shattered. And how do you pick yourself up from something like that when your entire world and everything you know crumbles? So I embarked on this journey to figuring out the question of how do you find intrinsic motivation when you fulfilled all of the goals that are set by society or you fulfilled your own goals? What happens when you get through university, get married, have children? What then? And I think I'm still figuring out the answer to that question. But I wanted to understand how to live life more intentionally and intrinsic motivation and things like agency or understanding your own brain, understanding why you do something really helps. But the second thing that I'm going to get into, which was the most helpful thing that I was reading this year, was this book called Tiny Experiments. It talks about how instead of setting a goal and working towards that one goal, we should look at our life as a series of tiny experiments or actionable commitments that you can take that you will fulfill over a set period of time. And this thinking has really helped me maintain that positivity instead of looking at my life as a series of random choices in very different disciplines that accidentally ended up coming together. I now look at it as, hey, I ran all of these experiments on my life. Some of them are hits, some of them are misses, and but I've have all of these learnings that now I can have great stories to tell from them. So they're not gone to a complete waste. But yeah, I think that really helped me maintain this sense of positivity.
I love how you turn that negativity into something productive. Because as we know, adversity always leads to opportunity in disguise. After all, Taylor Swift seems to create some of her best music when she's at her lowest points, right?
I love how you brought this back to Taylor Swift. Well, Taylor Swift is my biggest inspiration since I was 10 years old. And I think Taylor Swift's relentless pursuit for things is something that I've adopted into my own life.
All due respect to Taylor Swift and Travis Kelsey. I wish them all the best in their engagement and future marriage there. What's the smartest way to use AI when you're prototyping or when you're just exploring ideas?
So it would depend on how large your idea is. I usually don't go off into a prototyping tool like Cursor or Lovable. I first ideate over my what I'm thinking with either ChatGPT's voice tool. That way, I'm still thinking and talking, and ChatGPT is transcribing all of this and helping me make sense of what I want. So I ask it to generate a set of requirements. Now, sometimes I look at a model, for example, the AI models, and decide which one suits my need the best. If I'm coming up with the requirements, I have found that ChatGPT's model does it really well. Um, the O3, I haven't tested out the 5 yet, so I can't really speak to that. Um, Claude does a very good job of writing the code. So then I either take it to Claude or put it into Cursor, which uses the same Claude model, to write my code out. And that's how I sort of prototype really heavy things. But if it's something as simple as generating a website with already like preset UI components, I definitely use Lovable. It does a great job of creating that first draft that looks very pretty and neat. It doesn't do a great job of scaling multiple pages. So I definitely use Cursor for that.
I always love looking into the future, and it's important, right? Because you have to have that vision as a creative. Let's say that learning how to use AI is someday adopted in K through 12 education or primary school education. And let's say policymakers came to you and said, okay, Shruti, help us develop the ideal framework for this. What would you want kids to learn about AI early on?
Framework. That's a very interesting way of putting that question. I've never actually thought about it as a framework. Hmm. Well, I think from what I've heard about from people who are in the academic industry is they wouldn't mind children or students using the AI. It's more of they're worried that children are losing the fundamentals of the concept. For example, you don't give a first grade or a calculator. You teach them how to multiply or like teach them basic math, and ask them to by heart this long list of tables, right? So the same way, I think if I had to incorporate AI, I would get the students to use it, but ask them to give me a write up on how they've used it, why they've used it, what struggles that they've had, what problems they encountered, and how they reverted back. And I want to understand their thought process when they're using the AI rather than getting to the solution. So with AI, I don't think it's going to be more output focused. The lessons here are learning your interactions with the AI rather than generating the end artifact.
Yeah, it's really important because it's not just about using the tools, it's about understanding the tools. And speaking of understanding the tools, we hear about this a lot lately, that there are these tools that are used to auto detect AI writing, which are quite flawed, by the way. However, many university professors are using them and they're penalizing the students, claiming that their papers were written entirely by AI. And maybe in some cases they are. But what if a student is merely just using AI as a tool to help improve their writing? Do you think schools should simply just take away AI access, or is there a better way to address this?
Wow, it's funny that you're saying this. I just saw a TikTok, I think the other day, where someone had written a paper and their professor had called them out in front of the entire class. And then, with no explanation, they just asked them to meet them at the end of the class. And turns out the professor thought that the kid was using AI and they ran it through GPT detector or whatever those tools are. And it said that a human had written it. And the professor flat out refused to believe them. And I think he escalated it to the department head and whatnot. And I don't know where that story ended because that's where the TikTok ended. But bottom line is, I think this is where openness to change comes in. Um, it goes back to the point of like let's say, when Photoshop or AutoCAD was created, obviously it felt like drafters are going to lose their jobs or um, things. It was you're not learning as much. It But fast forward 20 years later, things were much more faster, and teachers obviously see the value in using a tool like AutoCAD. Similarly, I think AI shouldn't be banned when things are banned or not allowed. Children, especially teenagers, tend to rebel, and this is coming from a rebellious person myself. uh, Saying no is not, or don't do this is not the solution to getting it done. Again, it comes down to why someone's used it, and understanding their thought process is much more important than what they've done with it.
Wise words right there. Um, what is it about human intuition that AI simply cannot replace?
I think human beings are unique people. Everyone has something very different to bring to the table, and everyone's life's experiences shape how they see the world and how they process information in very different ways. And I don't think AI can ever replace that depth that human thought has. AI can't integrate tacit knowledge and experiences that are deeply personal to you to produce the creativity that we designers have. Sure, it can aggregate a bunch of people's experiences from a Reddit thread, but it certainly can't replace or replicate that feeling, nor can it channel it into anything and create something out of it. That is a power that we as designers have, and I don't think AI can ever replace that. There is this really great Medium article that I read a while back on how soft skills are now going to be the hard currency. So things like curiosity, storytelling, grit, empathy are all going to be super important. Personally, I think all of those are very true. And in addition to those skills, I think things like observation and taste is is going to be really important. And taste is something that is very uniquely yours and that is cultivated and learned over time.
If we could leave our listeners with just one piece of advice, especially for those at the start of their UX or design journeys, what would it be?
So these are the rules that I live by, and I'm hoping that if you take away anything from this show, you take away one thing. Under promise and over deliver. And the second rule is don't give up, both in yourself and in faith, no matter what.
That is a beautiful way to end it right there. I want to thank my guest, Shruthi Andru, for joining us tonight to discuss her incredible career journey and everything she's learned throughout. Be sure you connect with Shruthi on LinkedIn and visit her website at shruthiandru.com. That's SHRUTHIANDRU.com. And if you enjoyed this program, catch all the latest updates for the next Spotlight sessions and all the exciting content we have here in the Adobe Creative Career Discord by following the upcoming events calendar, which is located at the top of the server so you can see what's coming next. I also want to thank my new producer, Catherine Chu, Lisa Temple, live moderator, Elizabeth, and my honorary moderator, Glow, and the entire Adobe crew for sponsoring this program and helping to bring it alive. And thank you, Discord community, and to everyone who tuned in to listen to me, your host, Justin Bamforth, aka JBam. You can always catch me on Discord, LinkedIn, or my website, justinbamforth.com. Until next time, everyone, take care. For more conversations with creative professionals, subscribe to the Spotlight Sessions podcast or check out the Adobe Creative Career Discord. Links are posted in the show notes.